Good evening, I'm Phil Donahue.
And I'm Vladimir Pozner.
And we are pleased to welcome you to this edition of Pozner and Donahue on CNBC, where we have Vladimir as our guest. If there is an intellectual walking around today, and we might wonder and have some doubts about that, this is most certainly that person. Embarrassed as he might be about his media constantly referring to him as arguably the most important intellectual today, Noam Chomsky, nevertheless, has got to grin and bear the insistence on media's insistence on calling him, perhaps on occasion, the smartest man on earth. Well, he is the tenured professor of linguistics at MIT. He is one of the world's leading social critics. And do I understand that you have some information suggesting that he's also in the column with Marx?
Well, yes, according to what we've read, he is among the 8 most quoted thinkers ever, including people like Aristotle and Plato and what have you.
I'm the 9th, incidentally.
Well, I'm the 10th. Actually, the number 1, believe it or not, is Marx, and the number 2 is Lenin. But I think the reason for that is that in the old days in the Soviet Union, they were quoted in every newspaper every day. So if you count up all those quotes, that puts them way ahead. But seriously speaking, yes, that's what we've learned, that actually Noam Chomsky is number 8 in that staggering list of people.
Well, we want to talk about Professor Chomsky, sir. We want to talk about a full-length documentary playing in on the big screen in selected theaters around the country and
around the world.
And around the world,
yes.
Canada to be sure, which is titled Manufacturing Consent. And we will talk about that. May I ask you to bear up or be patient with our interest in soliciting from you your commentary on some very important contemporary events. Bosnia, the former Yugoslavia. What might Professor Chomsky want to share with us about this agony today and the United States' responsibility about it?
Yeah, well, actually, I don't think that's been primarily a U.S. responsibility. It's been tragic the way it's been handled. The situation has reached a point where it's not easy to think of a constructive solution anymore. A few years ago, there were options. At this point, I think the way in which the Yugoslavian breakup was handled was almost guaranteed to lead to extreme conflict. I think that's primarily a European responsibility in this case. Germany insisted on a very rapid breakup without any preparation. In fact, insisted that they were going to go through it alone, which means Europe has to go along. If Europe didn't agree and the rest of the world didn't agree.
By recognizing the independence of the different...
Yeah, I mean, Slovenia was pretty straightforward. I mean, that just pulled out, became independent, no great strife. The insistence on Croatian independence, however, was done without recognition of the fact that there's a substantial Serbian minority, and that was a guarantee of war, you know. I mean, and in fact, then there was a bitter war. Bosnia was recognized without any preparation, again, big Serbian minority and Croatian minority, and the spillover from the Serbian-Croatian war, you know, immediately brought them into it, and it was just done in such a fashion as to maximize everything going wrong, and it did go wrong. Now, at this point, when you ask for constructive proposals at this point, it's pretty hard to suggest them. I mean, there are things one, you know, I think there probably are palliatives, and one can imagine improvements, but a substantial, to deal with the problem in a really constructive fashion is not easy, I don't think. Yeah. I've yet to hear a serious proposal.
Would you agree with the view that seems to be pretty much predominant in world media today, that it's really the Serbs who are the killers, the rapists, the murderers, and so on?
Well, you know, in these conflicts, the ones who commit most of the atrocities are the ones who have most of the guns. And in fact, they have most of the guns, yes, so they're committing most of the atrocities. I mean, it's not that they have different genes or anything like that.
No, I understand that.
I am struck by your humble confession here, or statement of helplessness. It comes from one of the most millions feel, courageous social critics of our time. You almost went to jail in your protests of the Vietnam War. You have been thunderous in your denunciation of United States foreign policy in Central America and elsewhere. You are the person who has reminded us most often of the probability of power and violence expressed by just about all governments. And here you are saying, boy, I don't know what to do in Bosnia.
As I say, there were things that could have been done,
Right.
but they weren't done.
But what does your
now what do we
conscience
do
tell you
now?
now? We have babies being slaughtered.
Well, I think there are, as I say, there are probably palliatives. For example, I think the embargo on Bosnia, arms embargo, should have been lifted a long time ago. It's in effect a unilateral embargo.
In other words, let them feed the children. Is that your point?
No,
No,
let
no,
them
no,
have
let them
arms.
have arms.
Let the Muslim community have arms.
There's an arms embargo, which in effect is unilaterally on Bosnia, because that's the only, no one else is paying any attention to it.
So just hand out the guns and let them shoot each other.
No, I think there's more than that. I mean, I think it should be possible. I mean, there are technical problems that one shouldn't underestimate.
Yeah.
And you have to know the topography, and you have to know where who's going to shoot from which direction and so on. But it's hard to imagine that there isn't a way to, with a show of force and maybe even a threat of possibly even use of force, to at least improve delivery of humanitarian aid and to silence the guns shelling Sarajevo. Now, we shouldn't underestimate the seriousness of that. That's a technical problem. You have to know how to do that, You can't just say, well, let's send out the planes and do it. But I imagine that would be possible. On the other hand, if you talk about serious intervention, chances are it would cause a lot more problems than it would. It could have quite unpredictable consequences. So, say, take the possible reaction inside Russia. I mean, it's no big secret that there's an old tradition you can read in Tolstoy's novels, about we got to save the to save the Serbs from the Turks or whatever.
Turks, right.
That's an old tradition in Russia. There's a lot of concern in especially nationalist circles and military circles in Russia about the breakup of the system, the humiliation, and so on. It's entirely possible that, in fact, there already are Russian so-called volunteers fighting with the Serbs.
You say so-called, you don't think they're really volunteers? I think they are.
Maybe they are.
I think there are.
Could
Not a
well
few
be,
Russians who are happy to fight on the Serb side.
But suppose that the segments of the military really become involved.
Oh, yeah.
Suppose they go down there with tactical nuclear weapons on their backs, which you can think of a lot of ugly possibilities. And those, or suppose that some sort of international intervention would stimulate the Serbs to carry out the kind of desperate and violent acts that are not uncommon in small states or communities that feel themselves embattled. For example, they might decide to move on Kosovo, bringing in the Turks, in fact, which is not impossible. You could have a Balkan War. Now, all of these are possible consequences of direct intervention, and not to be treated lightly.
We are in we are in Fort Lee, New Jersey, with Professor Noam Chomsky of MIT, and we'll be back in just a moment.